Gonna be honest, I do not have a script for this video. I usually don't have scripts, sometimes for the important videos I make one. This one we're just not doing a script. Today we're talking about gatekeeping in the trans community. In my neo-pronouns video, I mentioned that I'd be doing a video about this at some point. Welcome to some point. Where we really see this starting is kind of with the rise of trans medicalism in 2017. I was 15. That was the year that I became an admin on an LGBT plus page, like on Instagram. It was this whole thing of like trans medicalism and like you need dysphoria to be trans, and like if you don't have dysphoria you're faking it and you're a shitty person. And my god, it was just so fucking tiring. I was a newly out trans person at the time. Like I'd been out for like 6 months when all this shit started going down. It wasn't pretty to be a part of, and like I tried to keep the page that I was running as neutral on as we could, because I hadn't had time to form my own opinions on it. It wasn't fun, especially as a young trans person. I didn't closet myself because of it, but it led to a lot of internalized hate of what if I'm faking all this. A lot of it, yes, was targeted towards people who said they were trans without dysphoria, but also it brought non-binary people into the mix. And as somebody who at that point identified as non-binary, and I still do, I have dysphoria. Like, it mainly surrounds my chest, sometimes my voice. Yes, I had that experience, but also, like, there were so many people saying, like, no, if you're non-binary, you don't have dysphoria. You're just, like, uncomfortable in your body, and that's normal when you're 15 and a girl. Because that's also where you talk about seeing that, like, sudden influx of people who are, like, aged, like, 14 to 16, assigned female at birth and coming out as non-binary or a trans guy. And it was just really shitty for a while. Trans people have always existed, but it's really in the past, especially the past 5 years, when trans people have been put front and center in political debates, in arguments, in just like other stuff where we're like, hey, we exist and we want rights, let us pee where we want to, please. There have been so many pushes for like trans activism, and that's amazing, but gatekeeping is a real issue and we need to talk about it. It is not productive because it just tears apart the community that like people have built up. Non-binary people were always part of the discussion, but like for a while they're like pushed to the sidelines saying, hey, we have to focus on binary trans issues because this is the majority of people and this is what we're facing. Like, okay, cool, but there's also some weird idea that like non-binary people are like speaking over binary trans people, and we're not. I don't think I've seen a single situation where like it's been a discussion about trans rights and non-binary people were like, well, we're the only ones here with a valid opinion. Like, no, it's a collaborative thing. The first thing that you really have to address, like outside of like bathrooms or locker rooms or whatever, is the violence rate against trans people, especially Black trans women and trans women of color in general. But for so long we're just like stigmatizing everything within the community of, if you don't fit this one cookie cutter shape of what we've defined as trans, then you're faking it. That just sets us back a long time. It doesn't let us focus on the real issues. There are people out there who, when they're younger, like think that they're trans, and then later on they realize, hey, this isn't the path for me. But that doesn't invalidate their experiences when younger. Like when you're a teenager, everybody's brain chemicals are wonky. Like you can't control that. Like, yes, some people, like, may decide later on, like, hey, I'm not actually trans, but that doesn't invalidate the time that they spend, like, learning about themselves. There's too much pressure put on, like, this whole idea of a phase. Like, oh, it's a phase you'll eventually grow out of, because that's the narrative that, like, cis and straight people have been pushing for so long of, like, being gay or bi or trans is something to grow out of. It'll change eventually. But when you keep pushing this narrative on people who don't fit your expectation of what it means to be a trans person, like, the whole thing about like calling them trans trenders, like, okay, cool, somebody may eventually decide like, hey, this isn't the right path for me, but that doesn't invalidate the time that they spent exploring. People talk about phases like they're a bad thing. It isn't who you ended up being, but that doesn't stop it from being a part of your journey. The first time I came out, I was 13. I came out as aromantic and asexual in November of 2016. That was about 2 months after I cut my hair short for the first time. That doesn't invalidate the time that I spent as a girl. Like, I thought I was a girl when I was a kid. I thought I was straight. I am neither of those things now. And in the future, if I decide, actually, I am a girl, like, okay, cool. I've spent so much of my life hating myself and repressing it and pushing it down because that's what straight people and cis people were telling me to do. It's, no, you're just masculine. These were the narratives just being pushed on me, and it was not productive. But when I'm getting those same narratives pushed on me by trans people, it's like the place that I went to and looked for support. People were supposed to help build me up and tell me, no, you're gonna be okay. Telling me, hey, you're still fake, like this isn't good. It's like, great, now I'm getting told that I'm fake and that I don't deserve to exist by both sides. Like, it's not helpful. The big debate came with this whole idea of like true scum versus too cutes. To a degree, like being trans is having that disconnect between the gender you were assigned at birth and how you feel. Like, that is what being trans is. And usually that goes hand in hand with something like dysphoria, so like being uncomfortable. But it doesn't necessarily just have to be with your body. Like, I'm uncomfortable in social situations when I'm read as female. I prefer being read as a guy. That's the world that I live in, and so I'm working with it. Keep just pushing this shitty narrative of like, no, you have to feel this one specific way about your body, otherwise you're faking it. Like, it's not helpful. Dysphoria can be experienced in different ways, like socially, like, yes, your body, maybe just emotionally, of like, this doesn't feel right. That's okay. Like, another thing that gets overlooked is sometimes for trans people, it's not an uncomfortability with certain birth assigned stuff, but it's a comfortability with not assigned stuff. In my real life, I go by my birth name because that's how I feel comfortable at the moment. Online, I've gone by Heron, I've gone by Rowan, I've gone by my initials, and it just depends on the space that I'm in. Me going by my birth name in my life doesn't invalidate my experiences as somebody who's non-binary or trans or whatever. But like, for some people, like, that's not something they vibe with, and that's okay. For me, initially, it wasn't hearing she, her that made me upset. It was hearing somebody call me they, them, and it feeling right. For me, in that moment, before I was self-conscious of my chest or my voice or my hips or anything else, it was my pronouns. And it was somebody calling me they or somebody calling me he, where I was like, oh, that's nice. Nothing ever felt more right. Because everybody's experience with gender is going to be different. That's why some people use they, them pronouns. That's why some people use neo pronouns. That's why everybody dresses and presents themselves in a different way. Our experiences are all different, and the way in which we want to present or act is going to be different as well. Gatekeeping has to stop. It harms more people than does good. And in its essence, all it does is try to make us presentable to the cis, straight world that we're forced to live in. Why can't trans people be considered normal too? Calling people a trender, saying you're not really trans, misgendering them on purpose because they don't fit your expectations of what a trans guy is supposed to look like, of what a trans girl is supposed to look like, of what a fucking non-binary person is supposed to look like. We are all different. We all look different, sound different, talk different. Like, there's that whole thing where it's like, so many people who are assigned female at birth are like seen as, are like coming out as non-binary, but like there are also people assigned male at birth coming out as non-binary. They're just pushed to the side because they're seen as less palatable by society. One of my best friends is assigned male at birth and they're non-binary, but their narrative is not one that is shared because it is not seen as palatable for people, because it is more acceptable for somebody assigned female at birth to be masculine than it is for somebody assigned male at birth to be feminine. We all have to work together in order to get out of this. Not just a couple of voices overpowering all the others and leading this harmful narrative. I guess in essence this is also a letter to Calvin Guerra saying, fuck you. You spread this shitty narrative for so long. Like, yes, trans people exist in different forms, but you keep spreading this idea of we have to be this one way, otherwise we're fucking up the system. Yes, it does help for trans people to go through a medical process, like in order to get like hormones or surgery or whatever helps them feel comfortable. But that's not the path for everyone. Eventually I want to get top surgery, hopefully before college. I don't know if I want to be on T. Not everybody who is trans wants to tell their story the same way. It's something I think had to be said. especially as a non-binary person, because, like, we get shut out of this conversation a lot. And, like, binary trans people face different things than non-binary trans people, and that's okay. But when you push this one narrative for so fucking long, it just gets tiring. If you're wondering why I specifically mentioned Calvin Guerra, it's because he's kind of seen as the main one pushing that narrative and has been for a few years. Like, yes, it existed on the internet before him. It will continue to exist afterwards. He acted as indoctrination for a lot of people. I watched his videos when I was 15. I didn't subscribe to that idea that he was pushing. I didn't push that onto other people, but I did push it onto myself of, like, he acknowledges that non-binary people exist, but only if they have dysphoria. His ideology kept me inside myself for a long time. Like, yes, I was out and proud of myself, but that doesn't mean internally I was doing okay. Thankfully, it hasn't happened a lot to me, but, like, yes, I did get comments calling me a trender. I deleted them and moved past it, but when you're, like, 15, that's not something you want to be dealing with. I had enough shit on my plate. I had enough shit to be dealing with, like, my homework and hoping I'd be able to pass my classes. I didn't need that extra pressure being put on me by people years older than me or people my own age with their own expectations of how I should be presenting myself because of my gender or my pronouns. This video has been all over the place, and for that I'm sorry. Certain aspects of this I think needed to be said. If this is something that y'all are interested in hearing me talk on more, leave a comment, subscribe. I probably will. But it's something I remained silent on for a long time because I wasn't prepared to talk about it. I didn't know what my place in it was, and I still don't. But I, at the very least, want to add my own 2 cents into it. Thank you for watching. Sorry for a serious video. I hope you're all doing okay. It's a crazy time. Pandemic and all, but yeah. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you kids on the flip side.